What if I told you this number used to be banned in IndyCar? Or that the previous winning driver gets to choose their group for the next race? Well, I have some IndyCar rules that no matter your knowledge of the sport, will be sure to shock you. The first one has to do with pit stops, and in such a fast, congested space, having such specific rules is important. Every piece of equipment, tires, and parts must be completely attended, and for the outside front tire changer, the mechanic here, closest to outside traffic, they must keep a foot planted in contact with the fresh tires about to go in the car, until the very moment they start swapping out the rubber. Think about that. A car barreling towards you at 45 to 60 miles per hour, and you're preparing to make a 6-second pit stop. But as a tire changer, if you lift your foot off the tire even a half second early, race control will hit the team with a penalty for a pit safety violation. Although it seems very specific, it's a very necessary rule to implement. We've seen plenty of pit lane incidents, running over wheel guns, runaway tires, and even close calls with hitting pit crew members. So taking a priority on keeping track of everything, especially the tire close to the fast lane, is important. In general, the pit lane is a very meticulous zone, and that brings me into the next rule. When a car pulls into the pit box, it must be parallel to the wall, and the inside rear tire cannot be more than 4 feet away from the pit wall. So they really have to make sure the car is in the right spot laterally, but it also matters longitudinally. If you overestimate your brakes and shoot past the pit box, that's a bit of a problem, but reversing here is strictly disallowed. You might see a sports car kick it into reverse in the pit lane, but in IndyCar, if you miss your marks, you gotta hit a full lap around the track to make your way back into the pit lane. That means if you have a puncture, low fuel, or damage, such a minute mistake can completely take you out of the race. It follows a similar reasoning to the last rule that the pit lane is hustling and bustling, and a driver blindly reversing back into their pit box in a low visibility cockpit is a recipe for disaster. As for the rule of keeping the car away from the wall, it's just really to make sure that the car is not spilling over into the fast lane, and others have to avoid them. Everything so far has been about errors in the pit box, but the pits aren't always open. In the case of a full course yellow, the pit lane is closed, and a driver pulling in is illegal, except for when that's the only option. Because IndyCar is one of the series that uses refueling in pit stops, if a driver is low on fuel and absolutely needs to top up, they're allowed to take an emergency pit stop. In these stops, only fuel is allowed, no tires unless physically damaged, and no matter what, the stopped car gets put at the back of the field. As a matter of fact, this fuel up is also only allowed 2 seconds of fueling, which doesn't allow the car to keep going. It usually delivers just enough to keep the car out until the pit lane reopens. This creates quite the opposite in strategy compared to what you would see in F1, for example. In F1, pitting on your yellows is the optimal scenario, but here it's detrimental. So it really adds another factor of unluckiness a driver can have, as it's not really an option, it's an emergency with fuel. The rule of 2 seconds of fuel and no tires is a good placeholder to prevent teams from gambling and being rewarded with a free stop because of it being a so-called emergency. But at the same time, it lets teams stay in the race in the case of an actual emergency, which would turn a quick 3-lap yellow into an 8-lap cleanup. Speaking of cleanup, another somewhat common occurrence in IndyCar is repairing a car mid-race and sending them back out. It's happened many times before, and we see it most often at oval. But teams will repair a car and send them back out to 1, collect more data, and 2, because every point counts. But there is a cutoff. On ovals, cars cannot be sent back out during the final 20 laps, and on road or street courses, they cannot be sent out in the final 10 laps. Although it may seem like a very minute thing, because of everyone scoring points and being sent back out can help you pass other DNFs, it does have a lot of impact to go back on track, but it creates a huge time crunch on repairing the car. It does make sense though, because you can imagine a close late race battle for the win, but a cold tire, still slightly damaged car is trundling around the track. That car could still drop parts, have an accident, or just inadvertently block leading cars. So by preventing cars coming out at the very end, it makes sure that it can keep the race result preserved. Another interesting one that has to do with the drivers, not the cars, is that in IndyCar, driver weight is pretty strict and standardized across everyone to a baseline of 185 pounds, which includes the driver and their gear. If a driver comes in underweight, say 150 pounds, they would have to bolt 35 pounds of metal ballast into the chassis, but that would be a bit unfair to heavier drivers, right? Actually, no. If a driver comes in over 185 pounds, the minimum required weight of the car goes down on a pound-to-pound basis to ensure that all the cars weigh the same after the driver's inside. In many racing disciplines, an inherent advantage would be gained, like karting for example, where lighter drivers are genuinely faster, but now it not only equalizes drivers that are lighter, but also just doesn't punish drivers who are being heavier, especially when things like height are a completely uncontrollable factor. Speaking of things that are not equal, each car on track needs to have a differentiation from one another. It's not uncommon that multi-car teams have multiple cars with the same sponsors, but one thing that's not allowed is having the same livery. There are 7 components, like the front and rear wings, mirrors, and a few other things, and there's a rule that 4 of the 7 parts must be a different color. A perfect example of this to me is Aero McLaren, as they have very similar liveries, but swap between blue, black, and orange for their other parts. This is very different compared to F1, where every team has the same liveries for both their cars. Another slight difference is the rear attenuator, this tiny part right here, and rookies have to have this be fluoro yellow. Having these differences makes it easier for race control, spotters, and fans just to see the difference in teams in close battles. And the rookie one is just a manual difference to have, just like how they place the R next to the rookies' names on the scorebook. Another one that I feel is kinda crazy that there's even a rule for this is a garage acoustic mandate. Inside the paddock and garage area, teams cannot simply just turn the key and switch on the twin-turbo V6 engine. Teams must attach mufflers to the cars directly on the exhaust when starting the engine, inside a garage area. And actually, when it comes to permanent garage buildings, the car has to manually be rolled out and then started. The reason why this is the case stems from noise, as the startup reaches 120 decibels, and being right next to that can be a bit concerning for losing hearing. Also, running the engines inside an enclosed garage quickly traps a bunch of carbon monoxide, and protecting the health of the people in the paddock is a pretty big priority. Now speaking of those engines, both Honda and Chevy are in a tight battle with one another in the manufacturer championship. During the Indy 500 specifically, these manufacturers can earn a huge payout if an engine reaches or surpasses 2,000 total miles during the entire event. If this is the case, the manufacturer earns a one-time durability bonus, equal to the finishing points of the engine that surpass the threshold. So for example, if a Honda car wins and passes 2,000 miles, Honda gets an extra 50 points in the manufacturer championship. This is put in place to make sure that both Honda and Chevy are not just building glass cannon engines to be short-lived and fast. IndyCar wants to reward longevity because it's not only important for safety, but also sustainability because you don't want to be throwing out engine parts every single week. By tying durability to points that are actually rewarded based on results, it finds a happy medium in the balance between durability and speed to maximize the horsepower and longevity of an engine under the regulations given. Now for the final one, the hybrid system in IndyCar is a bit controversial. Some people like it, some don't, but it does add a new way to start the car. On road and street courses only, if a driver spins or stalls, they can use the hybrid MGU to re-self-start the engine, and they can rejoin the race without waiting for any of the safety crew. However, the rules do state that if a safety worker arrives to your car, you are not allowed to self-start your vehicle, and you must obey all of the signals the safety crew gives you. Self-starts as a whole were added to keep races under green flag conditions when they can, and reduce short cautions for cars that need to be restarted. But the safety crew rules are built on safety. Severe injuries can be caused simply from the car being restarted on its own in the presence of the safety crew. Sudden blips of torque, or sounds, or even just a fired up engine could cause harm to people nearby, and it's just a precautionary measure to prevent any of that. Anyways, that's a few of the many rules in IndyCar that you may not have known. Some are fair, some are not, but that's all based down to preference. One thing is for sure though, there are a bunch more of these rules that kinda just are obscure, and if you want a part 2, just let me know.